Hi, welcome to my podcast, Becoming a Cut Flower Grower. I'm your host, Lydia, and I'm here to share my year of growing and selling cut flowers. I'll be giving you the lowdown on everything I'm doing and sharing all the highs and lows, the good times and the inevitable disasters, all in real time. Join me on my cut flower journey, starting right now. All right, let's talk about how you choose which flowers you want to grow for cut flowers. So the first question is to say, well, how would you choose a good cut flower in the first place? Well, as a general rule, you want flowers that have got a long vase life. This is more important when you're selling in bouquets than if you're doing, say, weddings and installations, because nobody wants to buy a bouquet and then the whole lot dies after 3 days. No one's going to be happy with that. The second thing is flowers with long stems. So I was a bit disappointed when I first started choosing cut flower seeds last year because a lot of my favorites actually have pretty short stems. Now, unless you're going to be selling them for use in bud vases, florists or whoever's working with them tends to like a nice long stem to work with. And the third general rule is to have flowers which have got lovely, pretty petals, beautiful colors, something that is going to look absolutely stunning. Now, I would add to this list scented flowers because for me, scent is pretty much the most important thing. And I don't know about you, but instinctively, if anybody gives me flowers, the first thing I do is bury my nose in the bouquet. And I'm always disappointed because flowers that are sold in the UK invariably are not scented. It's not a factor that's prioritized. And I find that particularly difficult to deal with roses. I really don't like shop bought roses because they just don't smell of anything. And to me, the whole point of a rose is the scent. So I would say grow scented flowers because already you're a cut above what's out there. I like to grow flowers that have got slightly twisty, slightly curved, more natural stems. Now, that I know that where I'm going to be selling my flowers to this year, that is going to be a feature that the florist is going to be happy with. But if you think about when you go and visit a high street florist, for example, nearly all of their stems are absolutely poker straight. So there's no point trying to sell something with a sort of natural, curvy, wavy look if there's no demand for it. So do you have to bear that in mind? And I also think the third group is unusual flowers. So things like carrot tulips, for example, which you just don't see for sale unless you're going to be in some super high end florists. So they're quite unusual. Don't bother trying to grow tulips that you can get in the supermarket because they're so cheap in the supermarket. Nobody is going to buy yours if they look exactly the same. So it's quite possible, it's quite easy to do a search online and you'll get told the best cut flowers that you can buy. And then you can refine this search based on the amount of time you have available to look after them, your budget, and your experience or your confidence level. So you could also visit a florist and see exactly what they have for sale. But do bear in mind that they're importing flowers. So they have all sorts of odd things like hydrangeas in the winter and just bizarre stuff that you wouldn't normally see. But it'll give you an idea of the kind of flowers that they particularly enjoy working with and that clearly sell well, otherwise they wouldn't stock them. And you could also go in and have a chat to them about flowers and just, pick their brains a little bit. You do need to bear in mind when you're choosing as well who you plan to sell to. So I've kind of touched on this already, but if you're selling perhaps to a high street florist who has got perhaps a very minimalist style, or they do flowers for sort of hotel lobbies or something like that, they're not going to be after a countryside style bouquet. It's just not going to be their look. But if you can find a florist that does a country look and that's what you do, then perfect. It's a great match. You can also choose flowers based on the value of them, so the sale value of them. So things like ranunculus, peonies, dahlias, they are more higher priced flowers, which will reflect obviously the amount of time you have to spend looking after them or how much time you have to pay for them in the first place. And if you listen to one of my previous episodes where I talked about dahlias and I talked about how high maintenance they are. Now, the ranunculus fall into the same category really as dahlias. And I'm gearing myself up to have a go with ranunculus, but they just look so difficult. There's so much faffing about. I mean, maybe people look at dahlias and think, oh, ridiculous, so much faffing about, and there's me having a go at it. But I'm going to hold back on the ranunculus just yet because I just don't feel confident enough to tackle them. They sound like these little aliens that you have to do. Well, they're sensitive to temperature, then you get them, and before you plant them out, you have to soak them in room temperature water, and don't under soak them, don't over soak them. Then they have to go out at a particular temperature and be maintained. And then there's all these other bits that happen. And then at the end of the season, you've got to lift them all and store them somewhere over winter. And yes, I do that with my dahlias, but I just can't face it. So if you are feeling very gung ho or you're very, very experienced, then by all means, pick the super high value ones. But if you're not, then easy enough just to go for the cheap and easy ones, your sunflowers, zinnias, snaps, cosmos. You can buy some really beautiful seed. You can spend a lot of money, or you could just pick up some seeds from your local garden centre or a supermarket. And they're really easy. This is the beauty of it. So they're not expensive, they're easy to look after. Some of them you can direct sow in the ground. You don't even have to mess about with seed trays and compost and all of that business. And you just sow them outside according to the instructions on the back of the packet, and you're away. You could decide to grow flowers that are particularly desirable for weddings. So things like roses, delphiniums, sweet peas. Now, the roses one is a bit of a tricky one because when I was thinking about growing cut flowers years ago, I went on a 1-day course down in Surrey to learn all about it. And we had an amazing day and walked around this fabulous cut flower farm. And we had lunch in the owner's house, and it was really amazing. And I learned so much. And the lady who ran the event, she asked us, all of us attendees, what sort of flowers we wanted to do. And I was straight off like, oh, I want to do top end roses. Yeah, absolutely. That's me. I want to do the most stunning roses in the world, and it'll be amazing. And I kind of saw this sort of flicker behind her eyes, and I thought, maybe she knows something I don't. Anyway, what I've since discovered is just, I know, well, they're expensive. They're very expensive roses, decent quality roses. And I think the initial investment was more than I had to spend. And also, I don't own my plot. And whilst I said right at the beginning of the series, oh, you don't need to own your own plot, you don't need to own your own plot. But also at the same time, I'm not going to put thousands of pounds of roses in the ground on land that I don't own, because that's a risk too far for me. And also, I think it's very difficult to compete with roses that are imported. Now, I'm all for British flowers, 100%, but you do need to have a certain type of setup to do roses properly. And you've got to be able to cover them as well to protect them from the rain a few days before you're going to be cutting them for whatever purpose. They're just too expensive, take up too much space to not cover them. So you've got to protect them, and protect them from everything. You can't have anybody eating the flowers, and a bird pooing on them, and damage from wind. They have to be in absolutely perfect condition, and I'm just not quite at that stage yet, unfortunately. I would love to get there, believe me, but the quality of the imports is pretty stunning. But that's still on my wish list, so I haven't said no to that. Now, one of the other types of cut flowers you can do, it's not really cut flowers, it's foliage. People do suggest that you grow foliage. Now, you really need a lot of space to do that because you can't just go and buy one pittosporum or one eucalyptus. You need to have a row of the stuff. And then you need to make sure that you cut it properly and prune it regularly in order so that the plants don't get completely out of hand. And there's obviously a cost implication of that. So yes, you could buy a pittosporum that's a foot tall, or half a dozen of them, and put them in. But again, you're not going to be cutting in enough volume for quite some time. So you do need to bear that in mind. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, because you could use it as some of the plants as a windbreak, and that's great. But if I was you, I would probably ask around and see if anybody in your area is already doing foliage, because I happen to know within 30 minutes of me is a lady who does foliage, and she's on a farm. She's got masses of space, and I haven't been, but I imagine she's just got rows and rows. And so I think, well, what is the point of me having, I don't know, half a dozen plants? I can't compete with the volumes that she's going to be doing, and therefore she's going to be able to price more competitively than me. So I think go to that lady for the foliage and come to me for something else. Oh, and finally, actually, fillers. Now, fillers is a good one that you could do. So things like amaranthus, amimagus, or laia, beautiful flower, I love those. If you, having said, oh, don't bother with foliage if someone's going to compete with you, but I think it's a nice option to have fillers. My 5 go-to, based on everything that I've said and what I grew in the trial beds last year and my experience, would be the following. Number 1, zinnias. Number 2, dahlias. Number 3, cornflower. Number 4, amaranthus. And number 5, snapdragons. Now, with the zinnias, I would suggest, and this is based on what I learnt from last year, is buy particular colours. Don't buy those mixed packets, because you can get some absolute horrors in there. And I think you'd be better off having, say, 30 or 50 plants of one particular colour done really, really beautifully than a bit of a mixture, because you want to ideally be able to hand over a number of stems at any one point. And if you're doing the mixtures, you might have, say, 20 stems ready, but if they're 5 or 6 different colours and you're selling them to, say, a florist who's going to use them for a wedding, she may very well not have, or he may very well not have enough of the colour that they actually need. So that would be my suggestion for that. So I hope that's made it easier to choose which flowers to grow for cut flowers. All right, well, look, that's it for this week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and that we get some sunshine. And I'll catch you next week.